The city of Salisbury was not always the quaint, picturesque place it is today. In the late medieval period, it was a bustling hub of conflict, where the church and the city authorities clashed in a series of intense and often violent disputes. Imagine a city where the bells of the grand cathedral tolled not just to mark the hours, but to rally the faithful against the city's leaders. This was the reality of Salisbury from 1302 to 1539, a time when the Reformation cast a long and dark shadow over the city. The Reformation, a period of religious upheaval that began in the early 16th century, has long been a topic of intense debate among historians. Some argue that the late medieval Catholic Church was corrupt and ripe for change, while others maintain that the Church was well loved and the Reformation was a shock to the system. In Salisbury, these debates are not just academic. They are rooted in the very fabric of the city's history. One of the most striking examples of this conflict involves a noblewoman who schemed behind her husband's back. This might sound like a plot from a modern soap opera, but it was a real issue in the play that was performed in the city. The play, which featured a noblewoman plotting against her husband, would have been seen as deeply unsettling by the Nahua people, who placed a high value on harmony in marriage. For the Nahua, men and women had different roles, but they were meant to complement each other, much like the deities they worshipped, who were often depicted as married couples. The friars who brought Christianity to the Nahua found a way to use this shared value to their advantage. They created morality plays that highlighted the importance of penance and confession, using characters that the Nahua could easily recognize as sinners. The noblewoman in the play was an unsympathetic character, her actions a clear example of the kind of behavior that would lead to spiritual downfall. This was a new concept for the Nahua, who were more familiar with the idea of sin in pre-conquest terms. Despite the differences between the Nahua's old religion and Christianity, the friars found that the colonial Nahua had similar ideals regarding women. Both cultures valued women, who were loyal and supportive in their marriages. This common ground allowed the friars to use universal examples of bad female behavior to teach the Nahua about spiritual transgression. The villains in the plays were recognizable to the Nahua and encompassed both native and Spanish ideas of sin. The friars' mission was not to Hispanicize the Nahua, but to Christianize them. They wanted to keep as much of the native culture intact as possible, which sometimes put them at odds with the crown and the secular clergy. The friars viewed their mission in eschatological terms, seeing themselves as the apostles of the Indian Church. They drew upon early Christian imagery, such as Christ Pantocrator, to demonstrate the all-powerful nature of this new god to the Nahua. The morality plays reflected the key issues that the friars were trying to address: eradicating idolatry, implementing Christian marriage, and teaching the importance of confession and penance. These plays were not just entertainment, they were powerful tools for religious instruction. The friars were willing to be flexible in their methods, even if it meant using unorthodox techniques, to ensure that their message was understood. In Salisbury, the conflict between the church and the city authorities was a microcosm of the larger tensions that would eventually lead to the Reformation. The city's leaders and the church were often at odds, with each side vying for control and influence. The church, represented by the powerful cathedral, often found itself in conflict with the city's secular leaders, who were trying to assert their own authority. This conflict was not just about power, it was also about the future of the city and its people. The friars in Salisbury, much like those in Mexico, were trying to navigate a complex landscape of cultural and religious traditions. They had to balance the need to convert the people to Christianity with the desire to preserve the unique aspects of the local culture. This delicate balancing act was a constant challenge, but it also led to some of the most innovative and influential religious practices of the time. In the midst of these conflicts, the noblewoman in the play stood as a symbol of the dangers of sin and the importance of penance. Her actions, while shocking, served to underscore the friars' message and to remind the audience of the consequences of spiritual transgression. The play was a powerful reminder that, in both Salisbury and the Nahua world, the path to salvation required more than just good intentions. It required a deep understanding of the nature of sin and a commitment to penance. The shadow of the Reformation loomed large over Salisbury, just as it did over the Nahua world. The conflicts between the church and the city authorities, the struggles over religious and cultural identity, and the efforts to balance tradition with innovation all contributed to the complex and often turbulent history of the city. As the Reformation gained momentum, these conflicts would only intensify, shaping the future of Salisbury and the broader landscape of late medieval England. In the late medieval city of Salisbury, the relationship between the citizens and the church, especially the bishop, was often filled with tension and conflict. This friction can be traced back to the city's founding charter in 1227, which granted the citizens many freedoms but also confirmed the bishop as the feudal overlord of the city. The charter gave the bishops significant powers, including the right to levy taxes and control the city's markets and fairs. Over the years, this arrangement led to numerous disputes between the citizens and the bishop, with the citizens often feeling that their rights were being unfairly limited. One of the earliest and most significant disputes occurred in 1302, when the citizens refused to pay a tax or tallage that the bishop, Simon of Ghent, claimed he could levy according to the city's charter. The bishop took the matter to the king's council, which ruled in his favor and ordered the citizens to pay the tallage. Faced with the loss of their other privileges, the citizens initially refused, but later had to renounce their liberties to avoid paying the tax. They quickly realized the consequences of this decision and begged the king to reinstate their liberties, which he did, but only on the condition that the bishop's right to levy taxes was also confirmed. The tensions continued in 1344 when 33 Salisbury men attacked the bishop's bailiff and other church officials, locking them inside the city's guildhall and stealing important court documents. This not only prevented the bailiff from holding the bishop's court, but also caused significant financial losses for the bishop. The incident was serious enough to require intervention from the royal council, which ordered the citizens to pay substantial fines and recognize the bishop's authority. Another major conflict arose in the 1390s, when a royal commission was sent to Salisbury to investigate a series of violent and disruptive actions against the bishop and his church. The commission imposed heavy fines on the city, indicating that the disputes were significant and had caused a major breakdown of order. The citizens were required to pay large sums of money to the king and the bishop, and to promise to obey the bishop's mandates in the future. Throughout the 15th century, the conflicts between the citizens and the bishop continued. In 1401, the city's general entry book mentioned a bitter lawsuit between the city and the dean and chapter of the cathedral, which cost the city a significant amount of money. The dispute over the city's right to hold property under the Statute of Mortmain also led to several legal battles in the 1420s and 1440s, with the city eventually winning the right to hold certain properties. The most intense conflict of the 15th century occurred between 1465 and 1474. The citizens and the bishop, Richard Beauchamp, were at odds over the bishop's jurisdictional privileges. The conflict escalated when the bishop granted a merchant permission to build on land claimed by the city. Both sides appealed to the crown, with the citizens accusing the bishop of acting out of malice, and the bishop denying their claims. Despite multiple attempts to resolve the dispute, including royal determinations and negotiations, the conflict dragged on for nearly a decade. The king eventually ordered the citizens to submit to the bishop, and in 1474, the city authorities finally agreed to do so, but the bitterness and tension remained. In the early 16th century, the disputes intensified due to the religious changes of the Reformation. In 1537, the bishops under bailiff Thomas Chamber admitted a surgeon to office without the mayor's consent and made inflammatory remarks about the mayor's authority. This led to a series of complaints from the city to Thomas Cromwell, the king's chief minister. The citizens requested changes to the bishop's charter and accused the under bailiff of overstepping his authority. The conflict continued until 1539, when the bishop resigned and the under bailiff was dismissed, but the underlying issues were never fully resolved. The conflicts in Salisbury between the citizens and the church were not just the result of unthinking or crude reactions from the lower classes. The city's elite, particularly the mayor, often played a central role in these disputes. The mayor's leadership was evident in many of the conflicts, from the 1302 dispute where the mayor renounced the city's liberties to the 1465-74 conflict, where the mayor's actions led to his imprisonment. The city's leaders were deeply involved in the legal battles and took significant steps to challenge the bishop's authority. showing that the conflicts were well thought out and driven by the city's elite. In Salisbury, the tension between the citizens and the church was a real and significant part of the city's life. The frequent and serious nature of the disputes, the involvement of the city's leaders, and the high costs and long durations of the conflicts all demonstrate that the citizens' antipathy towards the bishop and his church was a serious and ongoing issue in late medieval Salisbury. In the city of Salisbury, the relationship between the citizens and the bishop was often filled with tension and conflict. These disputes weren't just about the mayor or a few powerful people. They involved people from all walks of life. When the bishop tried to assert his authority, the city's elite, along with regular citizens, often banded together to stand up to him. One of the most notable conflicts happened in 1465. King Edward IV ordered the city to elect a new mayor to replace John Howe. Instead, the city council, led by 9 prominent citizens, refused and explained to the king why they wouldn't comply. This wasn't an isolated incident. In 1305, when the bishop tried to impose taxes called tallage, the mayor, leading citizens, and the entire community of Salisbury refused to pay. They even sent representatives to the king to argue their case. Another example is from 1395, when Richard II ordered 200 men from Salisbury to pay a large sum of money because of past conflicts with the bishop. This showed that many of the city's wealthiest citizens had a strong stake in these battles. One of the most colorful figures in these disputes was Thomas Chaffin. He was a wealthy merchant, a former member of Parliament, and a longtime member of the city council. Bishop Shaxton called him a busybody, but Chaffin was determined to challenge the bishop's authority. He often interfered with the bishop's actions, freed people the bishop's officers had arrested, and declared that Salisbury was the king's city, not the bishop. But it wasn't just the wealthy and powerful who opposed the bishop. Ordinary citizens also played a role. In 1305, the entire community refused to pay the bishop's taxes. In 1465, all the citizens supported John Howe in his dispute with the bishop. In 1491, the mayor, council, and all the citizens refused to send men when the bishop's bailiff demanded it. There are also specific instances where regular citizens took matters into their own hands. In 1344, a group of 33 men, including some less prominent citizens, detained the bishop's officers. In 1474, a group described as Sons of Perdition disrupted a service at Salisbury Cathedral, and the city authorities didn't stop them. These conflicts weren't impulsive. The city's leaders carefully planned their actions. In 1401, they consulted lawyers and spent money on legal advice to fight a dispute with the cathedral. In 1465, the city council held several meetings to decide how to respond to the bishop's actions, including taking control of disputed land and expelling a man named William Swain from the council. Sometimes, the city was able to reach compromises. In 1444, instead of fighting the bishop over jurisdiction, the city sent a delegation to negotiate and even offered to pay the bishop to restore old customs. In 1461, despite tensions, the Tailors' Guild asked the bishop to confirm their privileges. In 1496, the city asked the bishop to appoint a coroner because a body had been left unburied for 2 days. Even the most ardent opponents of the bishop, like Richard Spencer and Thomas Chaffin, showed they could cooperate with the church when it was in their interest. Spencer, who fought the bishop in 1395, welcomed him on a church visitation and later worked with a priest to repair roads. Chaffin, while clashing with Bishop Shaxton, left money in his will for church services and priests. The Reformation brought new challenges. Nicholas Shaxton, the new bishop, was a prominent reformer appointed by the crown. He and his associates, like John Madowell and John Goodall, were known for their evangelical views. When tensions flared, the citizens used the bishop's reformist stance against him. They complained about Madowell's preaching and accused Goodall of heresy. This strategy worked, especially with Goodall, who was eventually dismissed from his post and banned from returning to Salisbury. In Salisbury, the conflicts between the city and the bishop were complex. They involved careful planning and consideration, with support from all levels of society. While the city often stood against the bishop, they also knew when to cooperate and reach compromises. The Reformation added a new layer to these conflicts. but the citizens of Salisbury continued to navigate their relationship with the church in strategic and sometimes surprising ways. In the city of Salisbury during the 16th century, the relationship between the citizens and the bishop was often tense. This tension was not just about religious differences. It also involved deep-seated conflicts over authority and jurisdiction. One key figure in this story was John Goodall, a man who found himself in a difficult position between the city and the bishop. Goodall, who held several important roles in the city, including under-sheriff, steward of leets, and bailiff of liberties, faced strong opposition from his adversaries. In a letter to Thomas Cromwell in the spring of 1539, Goodall complained that his opponents were angry because he was diligent in performing his duties. He also mentioned that these same people were papistical, meaning they supported the authority of the Pope. This indicates that the conflict was not just about jurisdiction, but also about religious beliefs. Bishop Nicholas Shaxton, who took office in 1535, was an enthusiastic supporter of the Reformation. From the beginning, he worked to abolish the usurped power of that man of Rome in his diocese. However, his efforts met with only tacit resistance at first. The citizens of Salisbury kept the Pope's name in their mass books and continued to display papal pardons. This suggests that while they were not openly hostile, they were not fully on board with the reforms. The situation changed in early 1537 when Shaxton and his officers began to interfere with the city's jurisdiction. This intrusion into local matters sparked outright hostility. In 1538, Shaxton issued a set of injunctions that included reforms like placing an English Bible in every parish church and encouraging the reading of Holy Scripture. While these spiritual measures caused some discontent, they were not as controversial as his intrusions into the city's jurisdiction. The citizens of Salisbury had long-standing issues with the bishop's authority. These issues made them more resistant to a reforming bishop like Shaxton. If the conflict had been purely about religious beliefs, the citizens might have been more tolerant. However, the combination of jurisdictional and religious tensions made their resistance stronger and more determined. This dynamic in Salisbury does not fit neatly into the narratives of late medieval, lay clerical conflict. Historians have often characterized these conflicts as either crude and unthinking reactions or as part of a broader antipathy towards the clergy. However, the disputes in Salisbury were more nuanced. They involved careful thought and planning, but they remained focused on specific individuals and specific issues rather than becoming a widespread dislike of all clergy. The long-standing tension between the city and the bishop did not speed up the Reformation. Instead, it made the city more resistant to a reforming bishop and his officers. The relationship between the laity and the clergy in late medieval Salisbury was complex. They could experience both conflict and cooperation. This coexistence of concord and peace, and division and strife, was a common feature of late medieval ecclesiastical life. The legal writer Christopher St. Germain observed that the authorities, powers, and jurisdiction of spiritual men could cause conflicts. However, these conflicts did not lead to a permanent and general division between the spiritual and temporal authorities. In the late medieval church, periods of conflict and cooperation often existed side by side. The story of Salisbury's conflict with its bishop is a reminder that the Reformation was a complex process. While religious changes were significant, they were often intertwined with local political and jurisdictional issues. This complexity makes the study of these conflicts valuable in its own right, providing insights into the lived experiences of people in late medieval England. The city of Rome, with its grand history and vast significance, faced a tumultuous period from 1433 to 1533. This era was marked by intense conflict and disorder, particularly during the sede vacante, the period when the papal throne was empty after the death of a pope. This time was not just a crisis for the church, but for the entire city, as the power vacuum often led to widespread violence and chaos. By the early 15th century, Rome had fallen into a state of disrepair. The once glorious imperial capital was now a shadow of its former self, with the Forum turned into a cattle pasture and the Palatine Hill abandoned. The Lateran Palace, once a symbol of papal power, lay in ruins after fires and earthquakes. The papacy's move to Avignon and the subsequent Western Schism further weakened the city's spiritual and temporal authority. Local baronial families, like the Colonna and Orsini, along with short-lived Republican bands, vied for control, leading to frequent and bloody conflicts. The sede vacante was particularly dangerous. The city's social order was turned upside down, and the absence of a strong central authority allowed for rampant looting and violence. During these periods, the curia, the administrative body of the church, played a crucial role in maintaining some semblance of order. The camerlengo, a high-ranking official, was responsible for safeguarding the church's valuables and managing the financial affairs during the interregnum. The College of Cardinals, meanwhile, had to navigate a delicate balance between maintaining order and avoiding any actions that could be seen as assuming papal authority. The transition of power was not always smooth. In 1492, for example, the camerlengo Rafael Riario took an early inventory of papal goods to ensure their safety, anticipating the potential for looting. The destruction of the fisherman's ring, a symbol of papal authority, and the handing over of the papal seals were ritualistic acts that marked the end of one pontiff's reign and the beginning of the next. Despite the secrecy of the conclave, the sede vacante was a public affair. The ringing of the Patara bell on the Capitoline Hill signaled the Pope's death, and the conservators, representing the interests of the Roman people, played a crucial role in maintaining order. They met with the cardinals to discuss plans for protecting both the clergy and the laity. In 1484, following the death of Pope Sixtus IV, the conservators and a delegation of 200 Roman citizens met with the cardinals to discuss security measures. The baronial families, such as the Colonna and Savelli, even agreed to a truce to safeguard the city and their own interests. The period of sede vacante could last for days or even months, causing significant turmoil. The city lived in a state of constant tension, with rumors spreading and the potential for violence always present. The long wait for a new pope often led to economic and social instability, as the city's residents endured the uncertainty and the constant threat of disorder. The legacy of this period is a story of resilience and adaptation. Rome, despite its challenges, continued to evolve. The city's leaders, both religious and secular, learned from these experiences and implemented measures to prevent the worst excesses of violence during future sede vacantes. The rituals and traditions that developed during this time became an integral part of the city's cultural and political life, reflecting the complex interplay of power and authority in medieval and Renaissance Rome. In the end, the history of Rome during this period is a testament to the city's enduring spirit. Despite the chaos and conflict, Rome managed to preserve its identity and eventually emerged as a center of Renaissance art and culture, laying the foundation for the modern city we know today.